Hello, welcome again. And this section is called Vietnamization. So what I mean by Vietnamization is actually a process that happened in Vietnam to the Chinese ethnic minority. So we talked about previously how millions and millions of Chinese left China and they flew to all these different countries all over the world, but many thousand actually went to Vietnam, and they went through a process. And the process was called Vietnamization, which is they became, quote, Vietnamese. So in the 1950s, after Vietnam fought against the French and won, there's a process that happened in Vietnam. And again, they have already a current population of thousands of Chinese. And really interesting is these laws legally made the Chinese Vietnamese. Right? So before, the borders were very porous, like the United States throughout history, and then closed. So in the 1950s, actually the Chinese living in Vietnam legally became Vietnamese. And that is huge because if you're into citizenship, right, how does that affect your identity, right? Lisa Rohlfel actually talks about that a lot. So in the 1950s post, the Chinese living in Vietnam are legally defined as the Vietnamese. So that's crucial. So please write down your notes, okay? And that is actually, Monica terms it forced Vietnamization, right? So before you could just be China is very near Vietnam. You just go there, come back, port back and forth. But now the law makes you, quote, Vietnamese. So intriguing. Now, there's a long history of Vietnam, of course, that we're not going to get into, but I think pertinent for our class is actually the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam War, previously they had a war with France, and then the United States got in there, and that actually had a huge effect, of course, on Vietnam and also the Chinese Vietnamese that were living in Vietnam at the time. So basically, Chinese, after the post-World War, the Chinese were urbanites, as we talked about previously, and they were given a choice. They were given a choice of you, A, stay in Vietnam, but you have to give up your businesses and give up all the resources you have to the government. And you can be a farmer, be educated, etc., to the communist ways, or you can leave the country, right? So many of the Chinese were encouraged to leave in a very quick manner. And so after the post-1975, the Chinese in Vietnam, or the Chinese Vietnamese, were dispersed all over the world. In Singapore, in Hong Kong, Malaysia, Thailand, of course, the United States. And really is really intriguing. Most of them actually went to France. Right? So there's a lot of Chinese Vietnamese in France, but we had probably the secondary migration to the USA and Australia. So particularly if you go to Cal Poly at our school, you see so many Chinese Vietnamese, and you can literally trace them back to 1975, where their parents they could have stayed and given up everything, or they somehow migrated to another place and remigrated here. So very intriguing. All right, so there's 3 waves of Chinese Vietnamese migrants into the United States. And you can actually, it's really interesting because when I talk to Cal Poly students, it's kind of a fun trick is I try to figure out the wave, right, that they came here. Because the wave that they came here tells a lot about their identity and tells a lot about their their class level, right? So the first wave that came to the United States, and actually let me stop here, and I'd like you to take out your notes again, and I'd like you to write down what kind of people came the first wave. So the first wave were pre-1975. So if you can write your notes, who were the type of Chinese or Vietnamese that came to the United States pre-1975? Okay, so write that down. The second thing I want you to write down is the second wave. So who left Vietnam during the second wave, which is 1978 to 1982? Who were they? What was their class level? And the third wave is 1982 to present. Who were these third wavers? And what was their class level and what did they do? And it's really intriguing at Cal Poly because we actually have all 3 waves at Cal Poly. And you see that these 3 student groups, seemingly similar, they actually don't associate with each other. So very intriguing. So let's give you 10 seconds to write down, to identify the different waves. Okay. All right, the first wave. Now let's think. If you're in Vietnam, America's pulling out, who are the ones that can actually get on that TWA flight to leave to the United States or to Australia, etc.? Like, who do you think? Is it the poorest people of Vietnam, the beggars on the street? Is it the elite? Right? What do you think? Well, actually, I think you probably think they're saying the correct thing. It was actually elite. So the first wave were pretty much the elite. They were students who actually were privileged and came to the United States earlier to get a PhD or MA, somehow related to the U.S. government directly, right? Or very, very wealthy elite from that country, right? And so the first wave made up of elites, highly educated, highly global, highly educated on, quote, Vietnamese culture or Chinese culture. So very intriguing. So if you meet, particularly here at Cal Poly, if you ask them, did your family come here post 1975? Instantly, if they say, yes, I came here in 93, you know that they came from a very elite background. All right. So the second wave is, I think most of Cal Poly students are second and third wave. The second wave were not as privileged. So the second wave was 1978 to 1982. And these were just soldiers. They were everyday people. Some were not educated. Some were. But overall, not educated in terms of college for sure. So you have a majority that did not go to college, and some just did not finish high school as well. You have to understand that there was a war, right? And so school was suspended during that time. So you have a non-elite wave. And I think a lot of Cal Poly students in particular came to this wave, and maybe their parents are this wave, and they had these children here. And so it's a non-elite wave. It's a larger number of people, and very disparate in identity. Here you have more Vietnamese ethnic group coming through, whereas in the first wave you had more Chinese Vietnamese coming through. So intriguing, actually, really fascinating. And so even now you can see the class level, the globalization, and the language ability, right? So if you have the first wave who were elite, who spoke French, who went to French boarding school, you see their kind of background versus the second wave where Vietnamese was their main language, but they're not fully educated in Vietnam. So if I look at my own family, my father went to French boarding school, my mother went to boarding school as well, and so it's very different. There's a huge difference between the first wave and the second wave, where I look at my cousins who came post-82, whose parents aren't as educated, actually are Cal Poly students. And it's a very different background. You have people who speak 5 languages versus who speak 1. And it's very interesting. The second wave of Chinese Vietnamese don't speak Chinese. They don't speak it well. They did not go to boarding school, and they don't speak French. And so it's a very intriguing difference. And I think Cal Poly students very much overwhelmingly make up the second wave. Okay. Now, lately, it's very interesting. I'm teaching the last couple classes. I've engaged with a lot of third wave students, the Vietnamese and also Chinese that have come to the United States post 82. So sometimes you see them in class, they'll speak predominantly Vietnamese, and you kind of ask them, where are you from? And they'll say Vietnam, and when did you come here? And they'll say, well, I came here 5 years ago, or I came here 6 years ago. Well, that's very intriguing. That's the third wave, and I've seen more and more of these third wave students at Cal Poly. It's very interesting. So there you have it. Write down your notes that the first wave were the elite, global, highly educated wave who are highly elite. The second wave were the more hoi polloi, the more general group that included some middle class, but mostly I would say working class and predominantly non-educated. Okay. The third wave is also not as educated and pretty recent. And here in the third wave is pretty interesting is we have the mixed Vietnamese Chinese that were, the mixed Amerasians who were very much not treated well in Vietnam, and they're coming over the post-82, and it's very intriguing in terms of the 82 is actually there's a documentary on this called Bui Doi, and it talks about the third wave in particular turned to gangs and had some sort of educational difficulty. So it's very intriguing. There's actually a good article that I'd like to recommend called Pho and Apple Pie. There's lots of documentaries on the second and third wave. They like to quote it. they call it the boat people, I guess. And so it's quite intriguing. So I think I'm going to end off there and with our 3 waves, and you can think about yourself and how you're same and different from different ethnic groups, and same and different from your own ethnic group, right? And other ethnic groups. All right, so thank you so much, and this is the end of this section.